To the left, we have the Hisense U8G. To the right, we have the Samsung S95B. So, for those who wanted this comparison, smack a like on this video because we're getting to the point right now. The point is, well, simply put, I don't think anybody's surprised by this. The Samsung S95B does win. However, there are a few things that we can talk about between the two, differences that may or may not matter to you. So, if this video provides any value to you, smack a like on it and let's continue. So one of the things that you'll notice is if you go into darker scenes like now, how there's a lot of action, bright contrasty elements on a dark background, you're going to have a lot more blooming on the Hisense. Now what I'll do, I'll pause this right here and I'll try to open my ISO up a little bit so you can see some of the blooming that I'm talking about. So if we look carefully, I don't know how much of it you can see, but there's definitely glowing. It's not as bad. I'll lower it down a little bit. It's not as bad as that. See, like that stuff at the top, I don't even notice. But I do notice some blooming around the bottom and definitely in the corner on the edges right over there. I do see that, but otherwise not so much. But there is something to be said about the color differences where the trophy looks a lot more pale. I'll go ahead and lower this back down to normal to where I had it. The trophy looks a lot more pale on the Hisense, where on the Samsung to the right, it's more vibrant. These are fine little details that you're going to notice when you put these two types of TVs up against each other, kind of like over and over again. And another thing that you can notice is, like, if we pause at, we'll run that back here, we'll let it go back to this point and show you the color red, because I think while yes, I'm going to struggle to show that because cameras typically struggle with that, I can even just stop here really. One of the things that you'll notice is that, like, the clarity that comes off of the Samsung S95B to the right is truly undeniable. Like, there is just such an immense amount of color purity, I mean, through every strand of color, and then also the sharpness. And I think, again, comparatively, that's going to be the difference that you find. So while they're both using quantum dots, it is apparent that not being able to have, again, 100% self-emissive natures to it does affect the kinds of panels that we're talking about when we look at VA panels and anything really LED. That's really going to be a deterrent. But again, that's not the only downside. So while by itself it's a great TV, once you start comparing it against something like the Samsung S95B, again, similarly, if we open up the ISO or the camera sensitivity to light, you can start to see a lot of the haze. And that haziness that you'll see is really, it is what it is, right? I think nobody's really shocked that a full array has haze when you introduce a ton of complex geometry like this. And when I say that a lot. I mean, like, you have all of these lines that are so intricate and they show up all throughout the content piece. That's going to trip up the local dimming algorithm because there's a lot happening and it's a lot that it has to keep bright. So the areas that it tries to keep bright are obviously going to show a lot more wear and tear. Now, my ISO is set pretty high here at 800, but I want you to kind of get an idea of what it's like. Again, if you can see the blooming trail, it's not anywhere near that bad actually, but we'll try to lower it down a bit. You can see some hazing. I don't know how much you can see in comparison to the Samsung S95B. Again, when things start getting more challenging, and I think that's kind of the message here. When things get more challenging, you start to notice it in a big way. So I'll put it back to where it was, and again, continue with the comparison. And again, in terms of color though, that's where things kind of get tricky. If we pause here and we look at the yellow, they're pretty identical in a lot of ways, but if you look at the purity of the yellow, there can be no doubt that, like, the Hisense U8H just produces the color yellow a bit better. So I'll go in now to some other examples to try to show you guys, like, not necessarily the color yellow, because, I mean, look at the bird. We can kind of see that. I mean, again, I don't know what it's going to show you on YouTube, frankly. But as I look at it, like, it's a richer yellow. I'll try to lower my ISO down to something pretty ridiculous so you can see every little thing. Don't know how much you're going to be able to see. I'll just leave it there. Hopefully you can see it. But, I mean, like, it's very clear. It's just a very rich yellow on the Hisense U8G to the left. It's not to say that the Samsung is the worst I've ever seen, but it does tend to trend more towards a fluorescent kind of yellow than a natural shade. So that's just something that I would say there. This is one of my favorite scenes to use to show the difference between OLED and something like a regular LED or just LED in general. And you can see where the yellows are beautiful, the colors are nice, it has a ton of shadow detail. It does lack the intensity, the clarity that the Samsung S95B gives off. And I think that's one of the things that makes it really hard to recommend over something like the Samsung S95B if the budget is there. Especially now that the Samsung S95B at current time is on sale for $15.99 for this same exact 55-inch. That's a great deal for this particular tier of television and the quality that you get. But then there kind of enters an argument that we have to entertain where it's like, well, this is still offering a pretty competent picture with the Hisense U8G. Is it so much of an upgrade with the Samsung S95B that you should just throw away your U8G if you already have one? I mean, it really depends on the person, I would say, because for me personally, I prefer clarity and motion, and this TV delivers that with the Samsung S95B. But at the same token, these things do change because, I mean, like, even if we look at this, they're so comparable right now. They're virtually identical. So in scenes like this, I could say maybe not so much. It might not be worth it to go with the S95B because they, again, are looking similar here. But again, when you get to certain kinds of media, it's just going to depend. It's going to be a stress test. It's going to go back and forth. And it's kind of like anyone's ball game in a lot of areas, but not all. Motion is one of those areas where it's just undisputedly a win for the Samsung S95B, because if we look carefully, I'll try to zoom in here. Don't know how successful I'm going to be at doing this. If you look carefully, you can definitely see all kinds of like motion issues happening on the Hisense to the left versus the Samsung to the right. And in terms of motion blur, it's really difficult to keep up with Fetch as she's on the train. And any panning geometry, fast-paced geometry like this, it's just going to be really blurry on the Hisense U8G. This has been my #1 complaint with this television. Motion is just too blurry when it's in motion. I don't know why they think everything needs motion blur. Hollywood studios and game developers already add motion blur. They do not need to add motion blur. But that's what they did for their motion processing. So, c'est la vie there. Where on the Samsung, it remains clear, concise, and you can see every little detail and resolve every little detail of the motion resolution. So that's one of those things that I'll say there. But again, it's clear that the Samsung is the better TV. I don't think there's very many people that could argue that successfully being not the case. But what I can say is the Hisense does do a good enough job of giving you the picture quality that most people come to expect out of a QLED. And it gets you close enough, I think. But if we were expecting it to beat the Samsung S95B, it's not the case. And unlike its new step-up model, the U8H, it just doesn't have the black levels to hang as closely as the U8H did. So you're running into a lot more examples of trip-ups and slip-ups and things like that. So all things considered, when you look at the Hisense U8H, or rather the U8G, versus the Samsung S95B, the Samsung S95B is clearly the better choice, and if you have the budget, I highly recommend it. But that's not to say that what Hisense is doing is not able to keep up at all, or anything close to that. I still find it to be a brilliant picture, it does a fantastic job, but there is something better, and I think if you can make the swing for it, definitely do it. I highly recommend it. Both have excellent color though, they can get very close and very similar to one another, so if all you cared about was color, then there might be a little bit more of an argument. But if you need help deciding which one is right for you, reach out to me and I'll help you the best I can. Thanks for watching the #1 brand in honesty, and until the next video, I'll see you guys later.